Gwynúis agus a cóide, is mis an talamh pádraig go gara, uachtarán acadamh riamh an Éireann, agus tá áthar som fáilte curmh go léir inniu go dtí an acadamh. Good morning, everybody. My name, as Jennifer introduced, Pat Gyrey. I'm delighted and honoured to be President of the Royal Irish Academy and indeed to welcome you all here to this fantastic meeting room. Hands up those of you who have never been here before. And for the wow factor out of 10? Wow. Okay, good. Good to hear that. So again, welcome to the Royal Irish Academy this morning. We're delighted to have had such strong interest in this morning's conference, and we hope this will be a robust and productive sharing of views and expertise which will help to contribute to ongoing debates on this topic. I'd also like to welcome those of you who are attending virtually, and we're watching you, so if you're on your email or having a cup of coffee, we'll be able to see what you're up to. So I hope you're giving us your full and undivided attention, as everybody does when they're attending virtually. Not. Indeed, anyone who watches the recording of this video as well. So that's in the future. So that's good. That's one of the technologies we're making use of. Today's conference is a Celtic Academies Alliance initiative, and the Celtic Academies Alliance brings together the National Academies of Ireland, Scotland and Wales to further promote and encourage cooperation, collaboration and shared learning across our three academic and research systems. In that regard, we would like to particularly welcome our colleagues from our partner Celtic Academies Alliance here today, and I had the pleasure of posing for a photograph, blessed was I among women, as they say, with the three CEOs of the CAAA. So a special welcome to Sarah Skerritt from the RSE. Sarah, welcome. And Olivia Harrison from the LSW. It's hard to welcome Dr. Siobhan O'Sullivan to the Royal Irish Academy, since this is where she works, but welcome also to Siobhan. And as you can see, it's easy to spot who's the Irish person wearing green, so congratulations on that front, Siobhan, well done. So we hope that this fruitful partnership will continue to grow in the coming years. I think Celtic people have that sort of assimilation and ability to get on well, not necessarily always in the rugby pitches, but at least after the matches we all have a common bond, and it's ABE in that sense, so you can work that out for yourself as to who we're playing and who supports what. E being England, by the way. In any case, for today, the Celtic Academies Alliance is interested in exploring how our research environments converge and differ in this area, and how each of the devolved nations represented might learn from each other and work together to build strong and progressive shared research and innovation cultures. Research culture encompasses the behaviours, values, expectations, attitudes and norms of our research communities. It influences researchers' career paths and determines the way that research is conducted and indeed communicated. Research culture is continuously evolving and changing in line with workplace and technological changes. The advances in artificial technology and their likely impact on research culture and how research is completed has the potential to be a particular disruptive influence on current research culture itself. Similarly, the move towards open access for all publicly funded research will have a continued impact on research culture. And as an active researcher, it's very hard to get open access ticked off by your local institution if you publish late in the year, because all the money might have run out by then. So what you'll find is many people then hold off on submitting papers until they're accepted in the January, February part of the year, because then the money is freed up again for the year. So this is a way of changing the way research publications are submitted and looking at timelines, which is something I have to say we've never looked at before, but it does play a big role now. So research culture can vary by place and institution, but many of the essential tenets will always overlap: research integrity, collaboration and transparency. This conference will be forward-looking and will examine how research culture might evolve in the next decade, and will question how that evolution may impact the research landscape. It will invite a range of speakers from across the Celtic Academies Alliance countries, and also speakers from further afield, to give a global context to the discussion. We hope you find today's discussion beneficial and look forward to having a productive and engaging discussion on the topic. To commence proceedings, I would like to hand over to Professor Grace Mulcahy for a context-setting presentation. Grace, a colleague in UCD, is Professor of Veterinary Microbiology and Parasitology and a former Dean of Veterinary Medicine at University College Dublin. Elected to the membership of the Royal Irish Academy, she currently serves as the UCD Research Integrity Officer. Indeed, for a few years, I was your deputy officer, and I'm pleased to say, Grace, no great items of particular note landed on my desk, so you must have dealt with all of those particularly well, so well done for that. And also, she leads UCD's Research Culture Initiative. So thank you, Grace, and I wish everyone a productive and insightful day. Gorf míle maith agaibh go léir.
Gormagat Uthran. Lovely to be here, and thank you for the invitation to speak. Just one slight correction to what our President said there. He wasn't the Deputy Research Integrity Officer, he was the Review Officer. So if we mess up, or our team messed up, this was the person to whom people could appeal. But thankfully, I think we didn't bother you too much during your term. So I don't know what that says about research integrity. I'm going to start with a slight apology in that I understand that I was drafted in at relatively short notice to give this introductory presentation. And some of what I'm going to say, I think, has already been heard by some of the colleagues I've met this morning from Technological University Dublin in particular, because I gave a similar talk to them just a couple of weeks ago. So apologies for that. So now is the chance for you to do your emails because you've heard all this before. What I'm going to do is just talk, I guess, about the personal story and the personal journey we had in University College Dublin down the road here to thinking about research culture and the initiatives that we've done over the last couple of years. So the starting point was actually from my role as Research Integrity Officer. And with our small team, including our esteemed Senior Governance and Research Policy Specialist Jill Boyle, who's here today, and Adrian Ottewell, who was indeed the Deputy Research Officer, we began to look at the kinds of issues that were being presented to us as research integrity issues. And we formed the opinion quite early on that actually it was quite rare for people to set out deliberately to do really bad, evil things. That happens, but thankfully quite rarely. But what was much more common was the kind of niggling things that could impact on good research practice that in themselves weren't breaches of research integrity per se, but if allowed to accumulate and not to be rectified, could very well turn into something which very definitely could be a sin, if you like, against research integrity. So having thought about that then, we were aware of some of the many and really excellent things that were happening in other places and other universities, for example, in some of the Celtic nations in Scotland and also in Northern Ireland in research culture. And we began to talk to colleagues there. And in particular, we talked to colleagues in the University of Glasgow and colleagues in Queen's and began to find out how their research culture teams and actions were formed. So that was all very inspiring. And the next thing we did was we went to our then Vice President for Research, Orla Feely, now President of University College Dublin. This was just about 2 and a bit years ago. And we said, Orla, you know, we told you we wanted to take a preventive approach to research integrity, and we've been doing that. And what we think is really important is to do something to try and be positive and not just, nip things in the buds when they have happened, but to give people and to empower people and to think about the culture in which we do our research. What is it about our research community that perhaps fosters a positive research culture versus a negative or a combative research culture? And we said, research by its very nature is a competitive sport. It's a blood sport, if you like. Talk about rugby, well, researchers sometimes get into scrums with each other as well. And we said, well, it's really important then to temper this hyper-competitiveness with an element of our spirit of collaboration, collegiality, all those positive things that us who are devotees of research culture are familiar with. And we said, can we please have some money to do something about this? And it was lucky that Orla said, yes, you can, here's some money. We had an 18-month project. The first thing we did was we did a survey of the entire research community in the university, defined broadly, including our academics, our research managers, our technical officers and so on, and asked them what they thought about our research culture. And really, I think what we found out about that is that there was a lot very good about the research culture in UCD. People felt it was a collegial place. And they felt that we did do a good job, actually, in promoting research integrity. But as you can imagine, there were frustrations as well. Frustrations about bureaucracy, about the difficulties in perhaps communicating across disciplinary lines and so on. And these are common issues. And what came out, I think, one of the things that came out most strongly in that initial survey was that people felt that the university could do a better job in valuing the quality of research over just counting, over just quantity. And for example, people said, well, you know, we get announcements very regularly about, you know, Professor X has won a 5 million grant and Professor Y has run a 3 million grant. What about the people who are doing really excellent research but don't need 5 million to do that? And people felt that that was inequitable and that we should really put more attention on rewarding and acknowledging research outputs rather than just research inputs, i.e. the money to do stuff. So we fed that back, and I think quite soon after that we did get a change in that. So I think that was something that we can count as an impact of our research culture work. We've also done quite a lot of other things, such as, you know, looking at the entire community, the entire village, if you like, that's needed to produce these research outputs. The technicians who keep this really expensive, very big machinery running. Do we reward and acknowledge those correctly all across the university for their contribution? And we've spoken to our technical officers and they said, well, you know, sometimes we feel that you're the first people who ever come and asked us what we think. So I think we will have a succession of actions in relation to those. Same thing for our research managers. These are the people who ensure our grants get in on time, they ensure the finances are managed properly and so on. And we need to recognise, I think, their really, really crucial input to getting the research outputs over the line. And it's not just the PIs. And I know in the UK people talk about, you know, this toxic spotlight on the PI. I think that exists to a certain extent in our research environment and research ecosystem also. And we're trying little by little to try and think about that. We also said in our pitch for funding, actually, we need to think about more than just individuals and our own organisation, because of course we do research in an ecosystem which includes the funders of research, which includes the publishers, which includes collaborators in other parts of the world and other institutions. And we need to consider what we're doing as an ecosystem. And I'm really glad to hear this meeting here today and others which have taken place recently in Ireland, I think, begin to acknowledge and think about how we work together as an ecosystem to promote a positive research culture. And of course, in the UK, as we're aware, the REF will put an increased emphasis on research environment the next time it comes around. And we've been talking to our colleagues in Queen's about that. And one of the things we're interested in is to compare the work we're doing on research culture in Republic of Ireland, where we don't have a REF, with Northern Ireland and perhaps other parts of the UK, to see whether that is an important driver of research culture and if there are differences or divergences which will appear as a result. I think we started our work at a really interesting and good time, because after having got an extension to our project funding then, we agreed with the then president that actually research culture in UCD needed to be funded on a permanent basis, not just on a project basis. You can't do something in a flash of the pan and then think everything is going to be rosy from that. So what happened was we got sanctioned for a permanent research culture and engagement manager position. And that's our friend Dr. Colleen Thomas, who unfortunately meant to be here today but was ill. And Colleen is now embedded within the UCD HR part of our organisation, their culture and engagement team, which I think is really helpful and important, because research culture, after all, is just one facet of the broader organisational culture. And when we went to talk to our colleagues in HR, first of all, before this embedding, we found we were speaking two different languages. So they had trouble discussing and thinking about, well, what is research culture? What are they talking about? Why does it have to be something specific? And equally, we had a job to do in understanding what had been lost in translation from what they were saying to us from a HR perspective. And I'm really glad to say that I think we do understand each other and have managed to broker those linguistic difficulties, I think, and that's healthy for all. And this was all happening at a really fortunate time, I think, for us. I think we caught the zeitgeist, if you like, of research culture, because Wellcome's institutional fund for research culture was announced as we were in the middle of all of this. And we were very lucky to be one of a small number of institutions in Ireland to be funded under that programme. And a lot of what we do now, in addition to what we're funded by UCD to do, I think has really helped to lift our team. Certainly we've been able to enlarge the size of the team, and we're working on one aspect of our Wellcome grant with Queen's in Northern Ireland. And that aspect is a research culture network, an all-island research culture network that is managed by Ruth O'Kelly, who's here today, just in the middle table. And we have lots and lots of research institutions signed up to that, and I think we're having very, very interesting discussions. And the aim is to lift all boats, to really think about research culture and why it enables excellent research and research with integrity. Another thing which sprang out of our Wellcome culture was an interesting research project on researcher well-being. And so one of the members of our research culture team, Dr. Sonia Deshane, is in the School of Psychology in UCD, and she put forward an interesting proposal. Would we be interested in looking at the intersection between researcher well-being and research culture? So we said yes, and we obtained some postdoc funding to do that under the Wellcome programme. And what's coming out of that is actually really interesting, and it's just still in the preliminary stages of analysis, and I think there will be a lot more to come. But one strong trend that has appeared from that analysis at the moment is that researchers in general feel that not only the university, but actually the entire research ecosystem, encompassing publishers, funders, etc., in some way exploits researchers' natural enthusiasm and passion for their subject. So the way I can relate to that personally is that, and I'm sure many of you are the same, we get emails asking us to review papers in various journals. We usually say yes because we feel it's a good thing to do, or we often say yes. And then, we might be a little bit slow in coming back our review, and we're bombarded with a nasty email saying your review is coming up, it's due in 2 days, and then it's 1 day late. And and we do that, of course, for free. So to me, that is a really example of something in our research culture that can impact negatively on researcher well-being, and is an example of us as researchers allowing ourselves, I think, to be exploited by one facet of our research ecosystem. In addition to the work on the network and the work on researcher well-being, we're doing other things, such as we're doing a lot with our technical offices, as I mentioned before. We're hoping to have an interdisciplinary seminar series, or transdisciplinary, I should say, seminar series for early career researchers. And I think we certainly hope to make an impact in all of those areas. Changing culture, of course, is a long-term thing, a long-term endeavour. And it's very hard to measure, as you will know, the impact exactly of what you're doing. It may be some time down the line before we know exactly what the impact of our initiatives is. But we have, as part of our Wellcome project now, been able to connect with an external organisation who is helping us to evaluate that impact in an impartial way. And I think it's good fun. And the last thing I would just mention as an activity we're doing under the Wellcome project, and this one probably has had more airtime than others, is we've been able to fund a number of seed funding grants for people in different parts of the university for projects which they feel will advance a supportive research culture in their own team or school or college or other unit. And that's been, I think, really successful. We funded 9 projects in our first round. We've just opened the second round, and I think we'll have a very healthy application in that. And the projects that are funded are really diverse. So we have one looking at the use of AI in day-to-day research activities. We've one which is a pilot support fund for carers wishing to go to conferences. And we've got a huge diversity of projects in there. And I think once people understand what we mean by research culture, and it's not always easy to define. I think there's a huge willingness for people to think about it and to say, well, actually, we could do something that would make a difference in our area, but also would potentially be scalable in other parts of the university as well. And the last thing I will mention is that we have another project funded from the National Open Research Forum Stimulus Fund, and that is about developing an education module on responsible use of research metrics. So as we all know, RURM, responsible use of metrics, is an important facet of research culture, and we feel that, you know, there is a need for somebody to sit down and produce something which will help people both to write things like narrative CVs, but also to assess narrative CVs and to think about, are we being upfront as upfront as we should be about imbuing all of our organisational processes in RURM. So do we use RURM in promotions, hiring, etc., etc. And that module will be available across Ireland, hopefully from Q1 2025. So I think my time is about up now, and I might stop. And just to say that thank you very much for listening to me. It's been a really exciting journey in UCD and indeed nationally, broadening that conversation nationally on research culture. We've been inspired by what many of our colleagues have done in Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, all of the Celtic nations. Of course, we're the best at all of this. And I really look forward to talking to many of you today over lunch and formally and informally about what we can do to advance research culture in our own home parishes and more broadly as well. You haven't heard the last of me, I'm sorry to say, because I'm also, I think, a member of the panel, the last panel this afternoon, if you're still there, so hopefully we can carry on the conversation. But for now, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Siobhan O'Sullivan, Executive Director of the RIA, to introduce our first panel. Thank you, everybody.
Many thanks for that, Grace. I'd like to invite my panellists, you know who you are, to the stage, and we'll get started with the first session. So it's my absolute pleasure to welcome everybody here today to the Royal Irish Academy, and most especially our colleagues from the RSC and the LSW. Delighted to be co-hosting this event with both of those esteemed institutions under the umbrella of the Celtic Academies Alliance. So the first, and just to welcome everybody online as well who's joining us from Wales and Scotland, and indeed from over the island here in Ireland. I have the great pleasure and privilege of hosting this first panel this morning with an esteemed group of panellists. I'm delighted to welcome you all. And the first focus we're going to have this morning is on research integrity. So the question about how does research integrity impact research culture, or does it impact research culture? And I am delighted to be joined, as I say, by four incredible people who've been working in this field and who I think can give us a huge amount of insight into this issue. So I'm going to start from my right and welcome Rachel Norman, Professor Rachel Norman, who is a mathematician at least in mathematical biology modelling, in infectious disease dynamics. So you probably had a busy couple of years. She is professor in Stirling, in the University of Stirling, since January 2013, a professor of food security and sustainability. But she also leads the university research programme on global food security, bringing colleagues right across the university together to apply their research to issues of food security. So obviously a very pressing issue in these times. In April 2019, she took on the role of Institutional Dean of Research Engagement and Performance. And in that role, she's working to ensure that the university provides a positive and collaborative research environment to help people basically reach their potential. So welcome, Rachel. We're delighted to have you. Next on the panel, we have Professor Helen Roberts. Helen is Professor in the Department of Geography and Earth Sciences in Aberystwyth University, and she leads a world-renowned STEM research laboratory there. She also, since 2019, and to Grace's point, you'll see a lot of people are doubling up on jobs here. But anyway, since 2019, she's also held a university leadership role as the Director of Research Excellence and Impact, leading the REF submission for Aberystwyth and supporting the development of research and impact more broadly. Helen chairs the university's research ethics panel from 2018 to 2021, and in 2018 she also joined the university research, the research integrity oversight group in Aberystwyth. She became deputy chair there in 2021. So she has obviously played a key role in major strategic review of research governance at the university in 2023 and is now leading out on implementing all of those recommendations. Next, we have Professor Maura Heine, who will be well known to many of you in the room. Maura is an adjunct professor at University College Dublin, Institute for Discovery. But Maura, I suppose, has been one of the leading figures in Ireland in terms of moving the research integrity agenda forward for many years. She is a member of the Irish National Research Integrity Forum, where she has actually led the 2 revisions of the National Policy Statement here in Ireland on research integrity. But Maura has also served in a number of leadership roles internationally, and she is currently the chair of the ALIA Permanent Working Group on Science and Ethics, and has co-authored the ALIA European Code of Conduct, with many of you will be familiar with. It's what most of us have to sign up to say that we're complying, etc. So that's Maura. And finally, very delighted to welcome Professor Peter Robertson, who is Professor of Energy and Environmental Engineering in the School of Chemistry and Chemical Engineering at Queen's University in Belfast. Peter is a member of UKRI, Building a Green Future Advisory Board, and the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council's high-level group. He is also on the Strategic Advisory Group there for between 21 and 23, and Peter is also a member of the sub-panel of Chemistry for REF. So you'll see we have quite a diverse group of people coming at this from different perspectives. So I might just jump in and ask you, because you're all working in quite different fields, how would each of you go about defining, because Grace mentioned that sometimes the word research culture can be a little bit diffuse in a way. Do we actually know what we're talking about? So if I ask each of you, how would you define research culture within your own fields? And how does it, or does it, impact research integrity? Peter, I might start with you.
I rather thought you might. I thought this last night I might end up being first, so I hope I'm going to set this up easier for everybody else with how I may totally fail in getting this succinctly. Not only reflecting on my own discipline, my own field, but I had the role as a PVC for research for 8 years in Scotland, so I had to look at that as an institutional level. And something I think I would say up front, when we say research culture, everybody immediately focuses on the research community. I think if you're going to develop a really effective research culture, you have to look at that institutional. Now, whether you're looking at an industrial endeavour or whether you're looking at an academic endeavour such as universities, it's how everything works together. Because without that wider support, whether it's in professional services or it's on other colleagues who are helping support that research and supporting the delivery of research, if you don't have the whole culture effectively working together, you're not going to have an effective research culture. But coming to the research culture piece itself, I think the important things that you want to really achieve there. Clearly transparency, something that has to be supportive, something that is going to grow individuals from early career basis right through to being senior leaders, and embed an attitude with them to be very inclusive. A culture that breaks down silos rather than builds up silos. And something that is absolutely critical to that is this issue about integrity, letting people understand what integrity is about from the start. And I think in achieving that as well, you have to have a culture that people are able to challenge honestly and openly at all levels, and not end up being shut down because there may be inconvenient issues, inconvenient truths, etc. But critically, something that is very supportive, lets people grow, doesn't stifle things, absolutely breaks down silos, because that, I think, is something that we see quite often developing in institutions. And I think that can result in some very good stuff coming out, but more broadly, I think it shuts down other areas and other activities. But honesty, openness, and being supportive to individuals, to me, are really the key things. But being prepared to challenge and be challenged in an open and constructive way is critical too.
Great, thank you, Peter. Maura?
Oh yeah, it does work. Excellent. Thank you. I think I'd love to work in that institution, wherever it is. It's kind of Shangri-La. But, sorry. I suppose coming from my perspective, where I've been chin deep in research integrity, policy development for a long time, for us, I suppose in that sphere, research culture is the thing that can drive and influence both excellent behaviours but also really poor behaviours. So while you can, I think somebody mentioned it, you can do very good research without a good research culture. Would you really want to? Would you want to work in that institution? So it really is that, trying to tackle those very strong influences around hyper-competition and, the publisher-perish scenario. But I think also that attitude that a lot of institutions have, that if you go in as a PhD student and you come out the other end into a different career, you have failed. And I think that's a terribly corrosive attitude to have. So, even looking at, well, why are people in this institution doing this particular course? What is the value for society of training people, let's say, as PhDs? It's about training people to think for themselves, to understand how to assess evidence, how to generate evidence. That's so useful in so many facets of society, not just within the walls of academia. So I think that there has to be a kind of a sea change in how institutions think about the value of research. And I think that will really help research integrity at the end of the day.
Thanks, Maura. That's actually quite a fundamental question, isn't it? It really goes back to what is research for. Helen?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that's been said so far. I think, it doesn't matter whether you look through the lens of somebody working at your local sort of level, my immediate research group, or the wider department, or the role that you might play supporting work at your institution. I think basically you talked about, what is research culture. I couldn't agree more. There's the assumption when we're talking about that we're talking about a healthy research culture. But of course, you reap what you sow. And so I think, research culture is the product. It's the product of our behaviours, which stem from our values. It's absolutely critical to get those policies and that guidance and paperwork to act as guardrails. but really it's about the values and the behaviours, and that's what dictates right from the very local level up to the largest level. And we can talk about the external influences on universities as well that encourage those poor behaviours. So it's not just a question of how we behave inside universities, but we're also responding to those external pressures and those external things that are valued. So I think looking across the piece, and I couldn't agree more that, you know, that healthy research culture is really coming from thinking about what do we get from research, what do we value, how do we want to prioritise that. That's critical.
Thanks, Helen. And just for those of you online who are hearing it's actually a drilling sound, but we're actually looking into that, and hopefully that will cease and desist in the next moment or so. So apologies indeed for that. Rachel, just on that question, within your own field, what do you think, how would you define research culture, and if so, in what way does research integrity matter?
Yeah, so as you'll have heard, I can't define my research field because I'm both a mathematician and I work with biologists, but I think that interdisciplinarity is essential for us to solve all the problems of the world, which is what I'd like to do, obviously, but it's what lots of people want to do, and so we're not great in many cases at recognising that team approach to research, that different disciplines contribute in different ways. From a mathematics point of view, you can be it's perfectly fine to be a lone mathematician sitting in a room somewhere doing some hard sums, that's okay, but you can often be used as a tool. I don't mind that either, but you need to get the balance for people to be able to push their own field and contribute to other people's. So there's a bit of, you know, that the roles in teams and the roles that people play, and valuing those instead of just going, who's the PI on this grant? You get the tick. And the rest of you, well, yes, I know you were in the room, but it wasn't important. And actually, it was fundamentally important to have all those other people there. So I think we need to get better at valuing that. And I think I agree that we need the right processes at the top, the right messaging from the top. But exactly as you said, it's all about your local environment. So you can have whatever procedures you like up here. Different groups sitting next to one another can have very different cultures depending on who's leading them or what the expectations are. And we've got, I mean, you mentioned earlier that there are some evil people, but not many. And there are some people who are doing phenomenal stuff and spending a lot of time. And then there's a lot of us in the middle bumbling around going, uh-oh, any ideas? And that sharing of ideas, I think, is really important.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, Helen, you mentioned about, you know, we talk about a research culture, but that can be good or bad. And you talked about the importance of values, and I think that is actually core and kind of fundamental. So I suppose if I would challenge you to say, if I asked you, what are the 3 fundamental values then that underpin a good, healthy, as you say, a healthy research culture, what would those be?
I guess quality rather than quantity. I think it's very tempting to be bean counting and for people to have a dashboard of KPIs, and numbers lend themselves to being able to do that. But as we've already heard, that's not necessarily going to be that's not necessarily going to actually really tell you anything about the value of that research. So what other things are important? I think it's just fundamental, the behaviours to do with honesty. If we're thinking about, you know, not just it's the right thing to do to behave well from one human to another, but actually if we think about the quality of the research, that is at risk when we have these toxic behaviours. It can induce corner cutting, and worse still, when we're bean counting, it can, you know, cause fabrication of data and so on, or maybe omission of information which oversells something and so on. So we damage research when we do that. So I think honesty is absolutely critical. And I think acting both within a research context but also from one person to another in our local environment, I think that care and respect element is absolutely critical. Those would be my top 3, if that doesn't count as 4.
No, I'll let you away with that. But I think you're right. I think respect is fundamental, isn't it? Because it was, I think, a point that Grace made and it's been touched upon. It's about the entire ecosystem. So it's about having respect for everybody who's working in that ecosystem for the contribution that they're making, and seeing that that has to be a holistic, I think Peter talked about this as well, it has to be a holistic view of that. And we need to treat each other with respect in that sense. Maura, do you have anything else you want to add there if you were to pick particular values?
Yeah, well, I think I would definitely agree with quality,
Yeah.
absolutely. But, you know, it's really interesting because the principles in the European Code are honesty, transparency, accountability, what's the other one that I wanted? Respect. Respect. So actually there's, while culture, I suppose, comes at this from a slightly different angle, we're all trying to get to the same place, which I think is very interesting. Because if you've got a research community, and I say that in the broadest possible sense, including research managers, including, you know, the research office, but also including senior management in a university, because I think they set the tone. You know, we've all been in a restaurant where you can tell almost immediately whether the manager is good or bad, just purely by the attitude of the person who serves you your coffee. And I think, unfortunately, universities are pretty much the same. If you've got a toxic management structure, that is going to leak down, right down to the basis. So I think that when we think about values, we've got to think about how we can open up dialogue in a respectful way within our research groups, between senior and junior researchers, you know, that sort of transparency of dialogue, and people not being punished if they say something that might be a little bit unpalatable. I think that's really important.
Yeah. And actually that brings us to a question, I suppose. You talked about the importance of leadership within an organisation, and we all know, like, the fish rots from the head. So I mean, if you don't have that kind of good leadership and mentorship available, and I suppose, is there some difficulty, some sort of inherent problematic kind of paradigm there, that you have the senior leaders are generally the PIs, the ones who are very high performing, etc., etc. That doesn't mean they can't be great leaders. And I mean, my own PhD supervisor, I certainly would have, he was very strong on research integrity and was also very talented and attracted many grants. So it's not that the two things can't go together. But I suppose I'll come to you, Rachel, because I know, or you've done a lot of work in this area around how do you encourage that kind of good mentorship, that kind of good leadership? Because we've already talked about many PIs, many people who are in those leadership positions are doing 4 or 5 different jobs, and then somebody says to them, and now you have to be the role model for research integrity. Your job is to have this beautiful cultural environment where everybody thrives and flourishes. I mean, how do you support that? How do you encourage that?
Yeah, well, so that's difficult. Interestingly, I think our places, someone was saying to me, oh, well, now we definitely look at that in our promotion criteria. You have to have the other metrics as well, of course. And I went, oh, really? So do you have to do this on top of getting millions of pounds worth? Obviously, I said that secretly, I didn't say that out loud. I've just said it out loud. I understand I've just said it out loud. So we've done a bit of work looking at the people who feel they're in a good research culture and what they recognise as being a good research culture, and I've got my notes, picked out 5 sort of themes. So one is about the expertise and sharing knowledge and networks. One's about the interpersonal skills, so kindness, good humour, finding time in busy schedules comes out as really important. Activities that support teamwork and collegiality, and that can include cake. Cake comes up quite a lot. Good listening skills and good role modelling. Leadership, tact, adaptivity, and being inspirational. That's quite a big ask of anybody, is to meet all those things. And so what we've been trying to do is find examples of that to share good practice, because as I said a minute ago, there's lots of people who aren't deliberately doing things not particularly well. It's time and energy, and everybody has to reinvent the wheel at the moment. And you kind of do that based on your own experiences, probably. So this is the environment I was in, this is what I enjoyed, and maybe you replicate that for good or bad. And again, I've been lucky. I had phenomenal PhD supervisors that, if I look back, were just brilliant at this stuff, and I've tried to replicate that. But so what we try and do is share the good practice, share the things that people do, and that other people kind of pick from that suite of potential activities to try and do that within their own groups, so that everyone's not having to start from scratch and invent ways that work. But it's a challenge, because it's a time-consuming thing to do it properly, and we don't recognise it necessarily in our reward processes at the moment.
Yeah, and that does bring us to the question, because, I mean, as you say, that's fantastic, sharing best practice, because, as you say, many people just want to know what it is they're supposed to be doing. But at the same time, if you don't set the institutional policies up in a way that supports that, you're still the person who's like, well, how do I fit this on top of? And so I suppose, Peter, I'd come to you on that, because I know you've done some work in this area, about what are the ways in which kind of institutional policies, so things like promotion criteria, as Rachel has said, and other things, expectations that we put on our researchers, how can they those institutional policies either undermine research integrity, or more importantly, how can they support research integrity?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. And I sort of think back in 30 years now that I've been in academia, where there wasn't a lot of focus around what the expectations would have been with research, and particularly the institution I started out in. Moving into, as we progressed, to being people setting quite clear expectations in terms of things like outputs, in terms of income, in terms of number of PhD students supervised, citizenship, without throwing out a word like citizenship, without maybe defining what that actually is going to involve and what is it actually changing. I think the negative side is by saying, oh, we expect you to write 5 papers a year. Well, that is, you can't have a general thing like that across different disciplines. As we've seen, there has been absolute explosion in number of papers that are being published, that people are focused on just churning stuff out to try and get citation counts up, which again is something that we see coming and going. I think this has been one of the unintended consequences of saying we need to be focusing on number of papers, etc., without actually reeling back, and we're seeing this now, that look at the quality of what's actually going out. And it's the quality of the research, not the quality based on we've got it into this journal because it has such and such an impact factor, etc. And I think also the volume thing has fed into some of the issues and challenges that we've seen with numerous cases of people feeling under pressure to get papers out, and then this issue about fraud, setting in as well. However, I think it is important that expectations actually are set on what people should be doing. But I think these need to be very much considered on a discipline level. There needs to be a lot of dialogue with the community. And it also needs to evolve. Something you set now could be very different in 5 years' time. Something I'll just throw out there's always been this thing about income. And this measure about, oh, look at how much income somebody's generated. And I reflect on my own school. There was a blue plaque put up for one of my colleagues from the Royal Society of Chemistry. And he did some phenomenal research, but didn't generate millions and millions in research income. I've seen other colleagues who've generated phenomenal quantities of income, building up huge groups and doing very, very good research as well. So a lot of income can generate great research. Not a huge amount of income can equally allow a good level of research, but something, let's remember, research income is a facilitator. It's generating the income to do good research. So should it be a measure of good research? It's what's going to come out of that, I think, is what we should be considering. So yeah, if that income has been generated, what was done with it? Other measures, I think it's very important that we should be setting expectations around issues to do with citizenship, but trying to let people know what we expect individuals to do in particular roles. And this can be anything from mentoring and growing individuals, providing support, through to more senior leadership roles that people are getting onto, influencing things in national academies, sitting on government panels, etc. But recognising at different levels the significance of each of those, because it comes back to what I was saying earlier. That citizenship piece should be feeding into that wider culture of an institution and really supporting and growing things and ensuring that you actually develop that integrity and establish that integrity. And the citizenship piece, I think, is one of the areas that you can very, very positively impact the integrity. But I think it's important people have guidance, but we need to really, really think about what it is we're asking people to do, and we need to continually reflect on what those measures actually should be.
Helen, I'm going to come to you, and I'm going to be a bit provocative here now, so apologies in advance. So we're hearing about the kind of things that at an institutional level are problematic, in the sense that we are asking people to do various things, but we don't reward them for the same, et cetera, et cetera. And like, this is not new to anybody in this room. We've known all of these things for quite a long time. So as institutions, we say we care, we put research integrity to the fore, and yet it doesn't seem that any of these levers that potentially we could be using to change a research culture. So we still are very wedded to our impact factors, to our income streams, to our number of patents, etc. What's going on there? Is it a lack of will? Is it just nobody knows quite how to do it? What's going on, do you think?
Oh, yeah, no.
And how do we address it?
Yeah, no, I've got the answer to everything. Yeah,
Super, fantastic.
Yeah, no, I mean, it really is about how do you define success? And it really, but this is beyond what an individual institution can achieve, I think. I mean, there are steps that we can take towards that, absolutely. But I think we are also a product of our wider research environment. So the funding context absolutely plays an important role. And what we're celebrating and what we're rewarding with those structures outside of universities, for example, then yeah, that definition of success is where this lies. And I think about, quality research that we want to produce. Well, what is quality? So actually, where, for example, do we reward that really slow, painful slog where you, year in, year out, build up a reputation for having a really sound foundation, doing all that tedious calibration stuff that's absolutely critical in a STEM laboratory, for example? Where is the opportunity to celebrate that? Of course, we do all that by the by. It's absolutely critical to what we do. It's really important, but we don't celebrate that necessarily and reward that as a marker of success. In a sense, the reputation grows and so on, and success comes that way, recognition comes that way. But I think it's that really, that re-evaluation of how we define success. We're in control of part of that in universities, but I do think there's an issue in the wider context in which universities operate as well. So what are we championing? Say we reap what we sow. So what you hold to be important, our behaviours we're naturally competitive. I agree that we need expectations, kind of setting, and how should we be working. So if we really want to change things, it's going to take the whole community, including external to university.
Yeah, no, I think you're so right. It's not up to, no individual institution can achieve this. It's about changing the broader landscape. And that goes back to values, doesn't it? About what we value and what we reward, I suppose. So if I come back maybe more to you, because this is obviously your core expertise in a sense, and Aaliyah and others have thought very deeply about this. How do you go about then training? Let's start where we always say the good place to start is with the younger generation, right? So our younger generation of researchers who are coming into the system, how do you, I suppose, train them to see the value of research integrity if, when they're looking around them, it's not necessarily the thing that's rewarded? So you don't want it to become that thing that is the tick box exercise, that is the, oh yeah, we're supposed to care about this, et cetera, and even being seen to some extent as a barrier to doing the really great, interesting stuff that you will be rewarded for. So where do you start there with young researchers?
So I guess by young, then we're meaning young career-wise, so
Exactly,
early career, not necessarily young, of course. But I think things are really, really tough for ECRs. I think tougher now than they've ever been. I think we need to think very carefully as senior leads on what we are helping to produce and how we're helping to shape these people who are starting out in this. And if we have this, we've started in a survival of the fittest kind of model. That's what, people of my sort of vintage have been exposed to. And we need to think about, I personally thinking about, what's the legacy, what's the thing that I'm proud of? Is it the research that I put out there, or is it perhaps the difference that I've made to people, hopefully in a positive sense? But, that's that sort of sense of legacy, and it's not necessarily that people have stayed in the field, as you say, actually that people have come to enjoy what they're doing while they're with you, and to go on and to do well by their own definition of what that involves. I think that's so critical. So I think I don't know if I've got a magical formula, but I think it really is about I've had the great fortune, I think, in my own career, and I didn't realise how lucky I was until I peeped elsewhere into sort of other corners of academia. But I actually developed in a really supportive department, and it was just everywhere, through everybody's behaviours, and everybody was accessible, and your ideas were tolerated, encouraged, even, and helped to shape and develop. And that really made all the difference in the world. I definitely wouldn't be here if I'm anywhere in my career. I definitely wouldn't be at this point if I hadn't been in a supportive environment. And so how we encourage that and how we keep that range of people involved is so important, because if we don't have, if we encourage a particular kind of behaviour, or we, in the survival of the fittest model, you get one kind of personality really dominating and other people falling away or not being accepted and invited in even from the beginning. So I think it's so important to think that we need that, to encourage that diversity, because we're only going to be able to solve problems, and research is just problem solving and discovery. We're only really going to be able to do that if we've got a wide range of people there as well. So encouraging early careers and thinking about what legacy we're leaving, I think, is critical.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. Maura?
Yeah, can I just mention the elephant in the room, research misconduct, because we've been all very positive, and that is absolutely how it should be. But I think that we also have to acknowledge that where things go wrong, or where people find themselves in a dilemma, that the environment in which they're working allows them to raise those concerns without being punished for doing that. I mean, I think that's really, really important. And if you've got a positive research environment within which they're working, which perhaps, I've seen some really interesting models where the PhD students get together with the rest of the team maybe once a fortnight, and they discuss a particular dilemma. So, which statistical method should I use? There was one outlier. Is it okay to knock that off the graph or not? This sort of thing. So, and I think that really gets people thinking then about the quality of the research and the truth of their results. Because I suppose at the end of the day, we're all dependent on a pristine research record. And if the research record is not pristine, and it certainly isn't at the moment, that makes it very difficult for people to build on that. And it makes it very difficult for people to trust the evidence before their eyes, be that from their colleagues, but also, you know, the publics. And I mean, I'm a public in terms of physics. I know absolutely nothing about it. So, you know, I have to trust somebody else is telling me the correct information. So I think trust is also something that can be incorporated into those sometimes difficult dialogues that we need to be able to embrace and encourage and protect within our teams.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, it's just because it's quite irritating, the noise. I wonder if I could ask one of my colleagues to go and actually ask them to stop with that. So. Okay. That's unfortunate. Apologies for that. Just to your point, Maura, I think it's really important to think about that idea of trust, because actually as a public, it is public money that is funding much of our research. And therefore there is that, as you said, the accountability aspect. We are accountable to the public, and if we're saying to the public, trust us, we need evidence, it has to be evidence informed, and we are not, you know, we're not able to stand over that evidence base, that then obviously erodes public trust and public willingness to invest in research, which then is problematic for the research community as a whole. So it's something we really need to think about.
I think that in thinking about that as well, in how we communicate our evidence and how we communicate our outputs, it's very hard for people who are not involved in research to understand I can't think of the right word, but you know, that things can change. So you're saying, this is what I know at this moment in time. Come back to me in 2 months when I've got results of some other experiments, and in fact I might have changed my mind. That drives people crazy. It really does. I mean, I've heard there's Oliver Callan, who's a comedian, but he's doing a radio show at the moment, and he used to have a section which was like, you know, scientists say, and it was very much in inverted commas. So, okay, let's see what scientists say this week. And it was a joke as far as he was concerned. So I think there is a huge problem that we need to think about around how do we communicate the nature of research to the public, to policymakers, in a way that doesn't make us seem like we just can't make up our minds about anything. And I think that really erodes trust.
And that there can be difference in interpretation of evidence. I mean, it's still good evidence. Peter, can I come to you and just say something that I've been thinking about is, if we're talking about early career researchers, or indeed even more senior researchers, and thinking about how do we ensure that we have a good foundation in terms of research integrity and why it matters. We're now entering into a slightly different kind of era in terms of some of the technologies that we're seeing. And I mean, the obvious one there is AI and so on, and the impact that is going to have both on data generation, data interpretation and presentation. Many of us will be co-authoring our papers with AI into the future. Do you think that we're properly set up for that? Do you think we've really grasped the nettle on that one yet?
Or in general, when we get a new field coming through, I feel we are always. I feel we always are reacting rather than being proactive. I was thinking about this again, you know, discussions had recently. We keep talking about training researchers, etc. I think we should be embedding this as part of undergraduate training. The whole issue of ethics and research ethics, and people reflecting about ethics in their own subjects and fields. There are some disciplines do this really, really well because it's required in things like medicine, nursing, pharmacy, allied health, things like law, etc. Other disciplines, certainly in the physical, I think to a certain extent, life sciences and engineering, it's less so. So I think if we did that, we would probably have people as they're coming through, when things are starting to evolve, new areas, new fields are coming through, they'll be thinking of the ethics issues associated with them as the research is evolving. So in answer to your question, I think we're still reacting. We're suddenly seeing things. We suddenly see the scope of new technology, and nobody, I think, could have framed where AI was going to go and the whole range of different things that it could do for both good and bad. And I think we're still framing what the ethical dimensions of that are going to be. But I've seen this before, and I'm thinking back to the late 90s when we suddenly had a lot of debate and discussion on genetic modified food. And there was a lot of stuff going on there, and I think people were looking at, what are the ethical issues associated with this? And again, it was reacting to this. So my personal feeling is we too often are having to suddenly think, right, what are the issues, and work them through, rather than the early stage as these new fields are developing, immediately thinking what are the ethical issues associated with this. So proactively developing that as the research ideas, the technologies, etc. are developing. I think the only way we're really going to do that is if we embed this in the education system far earlier across all disciplines. So in answer to your question, do I feel that we're set up? I think we keep reacting, and I think we're still learning with some of the things, particularly around AI. As we find out more and more and more about it, there are going to be new dimensions we're going to have to think about, and think about the potential ethical dimensions with this as well. The important thing, though, too, is also to make sure that in understanding the ethical dimensions, that we don't put things in place that prevent the technology or the processes developing in good areas as well by being so prescriptive. Because there is a risk if we get so focused on certain issues that we can actually inhibit things as well. So I don't know if I've answered your question or...
As an ethicist, I'm always very worried when people, because if research integrity has a bad rap in terms of being a tick box and an obstacle, ethics suffers, I think, similarly. So, I mean, I always think of ethics as an enabler rather than an obstacle. So exactly as you say, thinking together about these things and the challenges and how we address them. And I suppose in that context, Rachel, and then I'll come to you, Helen, I mean, you talked about sharing of best practice. I mean, especially when something is these technologies are new and some of these questions. I mean, how do you as a community then address what impact that's necessarily going to have on research integrity and more broadly research culture?
Yeah, so it's, like all things, it's complex and it's hard. So for me, I don't know, it's not intelligent, is it, artificial intelligence? So there are opportunities there, but there are real risks that people rely on it and doesn't do what they think it's doing. And I may be biased by what some of our students are doing and handing in, but for maths, it just doesn't work very well. It's not got there yet. And I worry that suddenly we look around all my colleagues and everyone's expected to understand what those pros and cons of AI are. And I sit in a department with computing scientists, and some of them research AI rather than use AI for research. But with all these new things, I would prefer a system, this might just be me, where you have an expert who can come and help everyone else, than expecting, again, just reinvent the wheel. Everyone to individually work out how for their subject or for their assessments or for their research they could use it. And the line between using it ethically and unethically, I think, is really, I don't know, is it broad? Is now? There's a yes, good, ill-defined. And so I think we've got to be really careful about making sure we're clear about what's an appropriate use and an inappropriate use, and that does require, it's like research culture. It's a lot of hard thinking to think about how to do it, and we haven't all got time to do that. So supporting, maybe it is training materials, I don't know, but conversations, actually, we talked earlier about just, being able to say, is this the right thing to do? I'm doing this, do we think this is okay or not? And getting a sense check from other people is probably very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Helen, you wanted to
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I mean, I think, we're getting very animated about AI because it's so new and it's been developing so quickly, or coming to those of us who are outside of it so quickly. But I think it's really important to keep a sense of proportion as well, because at the end of the day, you've said it before, you've seen it in a sense before, it's a tool. And so it can be used either way. It can be used for good and for ill. But it's really important because it goes back to the values that we have as individuals and how we pass those values on to others, to whether you then use that tool to good and that you use it in a robust fashion, or whether you abuse it, and a worst case scenario, you abuse it to completely fabricate papers, which is incredibly easy to do these days, apparently. So I think, how we use it and training our people, and training, I hate that word, what I mean is really passing on those values in a meaningful way and surrounding yourself, creating that environment where you can have those discussions. But because it's a tool as well, we may also be able to use it to actually find more of those cases where it's willful misconduct and so on as well. So perhaps I've taken a happy pill today. I kind of feel like I have to be optimistic about this, and still it's people at the core, even though there's a tool that many of us don't really understand the inner workings of. It's how we use it.
Maura, do you want to?
Specifically on AI, well, I mean, of course, it's a black box. This is the big difficulty, isn't it? That it's a black box. So, I mean, there have been moves at a European level to try and encourage, force, it depends on which road they go down, the developers to actually include some metadata within those programs, so that at least you can identify where somebody has used AI, for example, to do data analysis or statistical analysis, because it can really mess that up. And they're also, the ERA have developed some living guidelines on research integrity, and actually I'd really encourage people to look at those, because they're under constant review, because you do a guideline and it's out of date in 6 weeks. Is the big problem. So, I mean, they've got the resources to be able to keep the guidelines under constant review as AI improves. I mean, you're right, it is a tool, and it can be a really good tool. It's going to get better. So why wouldn't you mention it in the methods section of your paper, for example, just as you've mentioned everything else? So I think people have to be really transparent and open about the use of AI. So what prompts, and I mean there are also guidelines now on good prompting. So what prompts did you use to get the results that you're reporting with this, for example? So I mean, I think there's lots of ways we can improve how we approach this. We can be positive about the positives, but also realistic about the fact that it is a tool that people need to be transparent about, honest about, open about. And unfortunately, you're absolutely right. I mean, AI is enabling the paper mill industry to develop at scale now, absolutely at scale. It's unbelievable how many papers have been identified that are emerging from paper mills. But that also gets back to what people value. So if you're under pressure to produce the papers, I mean, it's huge in China and India, but that's because they've still very much embraced the quantity over quality scenario in how they promote people and how they reward people. So I think, there's a lot of movement. I suppose in order to change one thing, we've nearly got to change everything, don't we?
Yeah. Rachel, did you want to come back in there?
It's a black box, but it's a biased black box as well.
Yeah, exactly.
As we all are, in different ways, but I think that's one of the concerns.
Absolutely, and when you have over 80% of those who are programming AI under 35 white men, then, and it's not a criticism, but it's a simple observation that we all have our inherent bias. I sometimes think we place too much expectation on researchers, to Rachel's point, to be experts in everything. And we can't expect them to be experts in research integrity, in ethics, in new technologies and ethics of new technologies, and that actually what we need to do is create supportive environments. And my observation is often guidelines are great, and Maura and I have written a lot of guidelines, but I think it's the application of the guidelines, and we don't support people and researchers enough in the application of the guideline. And then once you've done it once, it's like peer learning. So it's back to your point, Rachel. I'm going to give one final question to the panellists because I want to open it up to the floor and to those who have joined us online. And that's back to somebody mentioned earlier that they were Shangri-La, Maura, you mentioned. So let's take Shangri-La, right? And let's go there and say that if we want to be in Shangri-La with this fabulous research culture that we would all like to have, what is the one major change that you would say we should make in order to get us to that point? Peter, can I start with you? What's the one change you would make?
I think we're actually maybe going along and evolving in this direction, hopefully anyway, but I think it really comes down to the willingness to be open, to challenge and be challenged. And if people get something wrong, that people feel safe to actually highlight this and aren't going to feel threatened themselves by doing that. I think it really comes down to transparency and openness, and this absolute thing about you knowing that it's fine to challenge and actually fine to be challenged and interact in a constructive manner around that, because I think that's fundamental to having a really effective system around research integrity.
Great, thank you. Maura?
I think it would have to be research assessment, how we assess what we value, rather than assessing something that's easy to count. And I think if we can genuinely change how we assess researchers and research, that also leaves the door open for changes in publication models. And I think we really quite badly need those now. Unfortunately, the horse is well bolted with a lot of publication, and it would also leave the door open for changing how we fund research, and all of those things will feed back into, I think, a significantly improved research culture.
Brilliant, thank you. Helen?
Yeah, no, absolutely, yes, absolutely, all of that. And I think that comes down to thinking carefully about what we value, and I think the unintended consequences of holding those particular things up and then rewarding those things that we decide finally to value. That's all part of it.
Rachel?
I'm going big, ambitious,
good,
slightly controversial.
Love it.
Obviously, smash the patriarchy.
Obviously.
Obviously. Burn league tables. Anything that's causing competitiveness between institutions, between individuals, that's the nub of the problem. And we could not, we do that to, we do it to ourselves. That's just stupid. And it's back to what we value and what we, straight, as easy as that. We can do that by Christmas, I think.
Great. Well, we can all go home now. Early weekend. So I want to thank the panelists very, very much. But before we close this session, there's 10 minutes now or 8 minutes left for questions from the floor. And I'd really invite you to put your questions to our panelists. And if we have any online questions, that would be great. So I'll start maybe with online and then I'll come to the room. Jennifer?
Thanks a million, Siobhan. So we have more than 50 people joining us online. So we've a comment and 2 questions. One of our online participants is Hilary Noon from the UKRI, And she just wanted to weigh in to let us know that narrative CVs help towards shifting the reward and recognition system, but there's actually a community helping people engage with that, and she's given us a link, so I'll circulate that to everybody afterwards. And she's also letting us know about a peer exchange platform that can help you articulate your contributions and achievements for these narrative CVs, so that's very interesting. And again, both those links will go out to everybody here and online. The two questions I have online, I might give them to the panel together because they're kind of slightly linked. But they came in from anonymous attendees, and the first is, what is the panel's view on the role of professional service teams in contributing to our research culture? We're seeing the establishment of many research culture teams within institutions, and how do these link in with research on the ground? And then the other thing that our online attendees have asked you to consider is, from your perspectives, what are the specific challenges for developing a flourishing research culture in arts and humanities particularly?
Peter.
I'm happy to take the professional services side, and it comes back to the comment I said at the start. It's the whole academic culture, and we need everybody there to support research across all levels. I really value, and I've always valued, the support that I've had from my colleagues in professional services, some of whom are here today, particularly when regulations, etc. have changed, but also if something crops up, I know I've got somewhere I can go and have some discussion and get really good value advice and guidance. And I think it is critical that we respect the expertise that is coming through from there. And we forget that they are absolutely critical to the research culture. And while some may not be engaging in doing the research themselves, we can't do that without the knowledge and expertise that they are bringing and the support that they are bringing as well. And I think far too often they're undervalued across the whole sector.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, Rachel.
So I agree, but I think research culture sits so centrally that it has to be partnership working across all the, and it's what you've just said, but particularly, yeah, we need that expertise of lots of different areas of professional services. So, you know, we talked about HR earlier, and finance and all those things. Going to go controversial again. I have concerns that there's a world in England of a lot of research culture professionals who, again, have got the expertise but are kind of separating a little bit from the academics because that's their job and they do it full time, and it has to be co-produced. It has to be a joint effort. And there's some really great examples. I mean, our institution's fantastic from our partnership working with professional service, but the research culture, I think, sits absolutely across. I know I've separated us out, both sides of the whole institution.
Thank you. Maura?
I suppose I was just thinking about how you reward and how you credit people who have contributed to a research output. And I think that the idea of author contribution statements or even the credit taxonomy are terrific because it does leave space to acknowledge the contribution of people who might not be the ones necessarily holding the pipette, but they might have been the people who autoclaved that pipette. You know, I know that's very simplistic, sorry, but yeah, we have to change the way we think about crediting people.
And that comes back to more collaborative approaches rather than this kind of competitive. Helen?
And I think, you know, in the wider professional services, for example, I mean, it's not just, you know, then maybe there's not that authorship opportunity. But one of the things that we had at my own institution this year was something introduced by the Women in Research Network, which was the Visibility Awards. And the idea of this was to actually recognise and celebrate the contributions of people who aren't traditionally held up as a model of success. So you're not talking about, you know, your professor, your PI, you're talking about, you know, where are these people who, without whose contribution, you know, we wouldn't be able to deliver on that research. And think there were more than 50 nominations, and it was fantastic, you know, to be able to for those people to get recognised and get the recognition they deserve, and actually to be widely celebrated. And all of them were celebrated. There wasn't one award. There were as many awards as there were applicants that met the criteria, which, you know, and that was just the females in the institution in those less recognised roles as well. So I think actually being able to acknowledge and reward and talk about, make space to talk about those contributions is really, really critical, because it's an absolutely essential part of the team.
Yeah, thank you. I'll go to the room. I saw a couple of hands. I'll start maybe here.
That was fabulous. Thank you. So I'm Tim Brundle. I'm the Research Director of Ulster University. Two very, very quick things. We're leading on the Practices Research project as part of the Research Culture Network. I would love to come and talk to you about research culture in the arts and humanities at a later date. There was a question sparked by something that Maura said around research misconduct. And keen for thoughts on how you maintain, and this is obviously not specific to Ulster, but how you maintain good research culture in the midst of research misconduct, when openness disappears, hierarchies get established, etc.
It's a great question. Who on the panel would like to tackle that?
Since I was quoted, I suppose. That's a really good question, and it's very tricky because, but I think that is also part of a strong research culture, that you acknowledge that things can go pear-shaped sometimes, and sometimes there are bad actors. But if you have allowed the space for difficult dialogues, for colleagues to call somebody out, for example, without being punished, which is, I think that's really critical. There's so many awful examples of the whistleblowers being the ones who suffered most. So I think a strong research culture should be able to create that space for those difficult and dialogues to happen, and for people to be able to be honest about what they're seeing, for example, in a laboratory, without getting it in the neck.
I'm going to take another couple of questions because we're right on time and I don't want to delay the next panel. So are there any other questions in the room? So I'll take a question from Michelle and then from Claire.
So my name is Michelle, I'm the National Open Research Coordinator, and just to Maura's first point, I prefer to think of myself as a reformed academic rather than a failed academic, so that's an aside. Helen, you briefly mentioned the role of monitoring, or maybe the appropriateness of monitoring things like research integrity, research culture, and this is kind of a question that open research is also trying to grapple with at the moment, when a lot of the changes are qualitative rather than quantitative and kind of have a longer impact. I would just be curious to hear what the panelists feel the role of monitoring these changes are, or the effectiveness of them.
So I'm going to, it's complex. So one of the things I think, so I've been listening in on the people, culture and environment kind of conversations. What we talk about in our institution a lot is kind of trust in systems. And so can you do surveys to find out, not if you've got a system in place, but whether people trust that system, and whether that increases. And if you do things like are getting stronger research integrity, actually you'd expect to see more cases and more problems before you see fewer, because people are more prepared to report if you've got a better system. So I think you've not got to be frightened of the fact that that's going to be a likely outcome of having put a better system in place. So I sort of think surveys, I know they're not the only answer, and I know there are flaws in them, but finding out to get the qualitative stuff, how people feel, whether they've got a trust or a confidence in a system is one way of measuring some processes.
Helen, did you want to? No? Okay. Claire had a question.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Claire Connolly. I'm the Arts and Humanities and Social Sciences Secretary for the Academy. I work in the Republic of Ireland, but I also served on the last REF panel in my discipline. And I wanted to ask about REF because it seems, we have so many matters of shared concern and interest across our islands. And so clear from the panel, the conversation flowed around these shared topics very well. But REF is such an enormous point of divergence as well between the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom. Even something as simple as the fact, the way it sustains its own kind of para-economy of HE consultancies, and it's a whole world that is really unknown to us in the Republic of Ireland. So I was just wondering your thoughts about that, about, does it have a distorting effect in Ireland, or is it something we should look to and think about, or just in general views on that?
I wonder if maybe Peter and Helen might comment on this, because both of you have been involved in REF. You probably don't know enough about the Irish situation, but whether it's something you would, as Claire said, recommend to us or caution us about. Peter?
Okay. REF's changed quite a lot since we had the original exercise. I think it was 1986, which was one of the original research assessment exercises. You could argue that a lot of institutions end up looking at what's going to be expected around REF and, should I say, game playing? Maybe it is game playing in terms of how people are preparing. There's a big industry around the preparation for REF. No sooner is one REF over than you're getting into the next one. I think it's important that we do have a mechanism by which we can look at research and, assessing what effectively a lot of public money is being spent on. One of the things I think positive to come out more recent years is this issue about impact and a greater emphasis about, what's the impact of the research that's gone on, and moving it just purely from papers or metrics such as income, PhD students, etc. Having been through the process, I think it was done very, very rigorously and very effectively, and I think a lot of time and thought and effort went in across the whole process, both from submitting what went in and also going through that assessment process. I think it probably has started, shall we say, institutions look at behaviours based around, what are we doing towards the next REF? And quite often, even on promotion panels, you hear people saying, how many REFable papers now are coming through? And it's across other institutions that have been involved in promotions panels as well. I think there's a place for it, and other countries have looked at taking something like REF, but maybe not as hard as REF would be in terms of as rigid as REF. I think we should have something, but that shouldn't be the thing that dictates how research is conducted. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question quite.
Thanks, Peter. Helen?
It's a really complicated situation. I mean, yes, we need to be accountable for public monies, but do we need to assess competitively? REF might claim that it's not producing a competitive assessment, but their assessment is then used to rank universities that drives funding. And the fact that REF produces distorting and bad behaviours is widely recognised, so much so that we're introducing a culture element in this time in the REF that's coming up in the UK to try and compensate for that. So it's really interesting to be hosting a competitive competition involving culture as well, which is a little bit perverse in itself. But having said that, obviously REF does drive behaviour, so maybe that is a good place to put it if you've got yourself in that pickle in the first place. I think it's really interesting to look at a plot of the REF outcome and the QR funding that goes ahead, and it's pretty much FTE that divides that funding at that point, that dictates that funding. So at that point, what are we doing? We're going through all this agony. What would happen if I agree, would you be able to remove those alpha male behaviours if you didn't have a competition for funding? Instead, you demonstrated your accountability for public monies, but you gave everybody a flat slice of research income and let everybody at least have some funding to speculate with. Some people will make more of that than others, but maybe that's a different way of doing things. But
really interesting. Okay, I'm going to draw this panel to a close. I would like you to give a huge round of applause for our panelists. It's been a wonderful conversation, and thank you so much for joining us. So a well-deserved break for everybody in the room. Thanks so much. I would ask people let's reconvene here around 12:50 so we can get to lunch on time as well. So if everybody could be back in the room for 12:50. Thanks so much.